Genghis Khan paired brutality and intimidation with charisma and innovation. It was that combo that carried him from a traumatic childhood to the helm of the world's most powerful empire. Hi, I'm Rich Burnett for Wondrium, and in this episode of Perspectives, 3 presenters discuss Genghis Khan's origins, his fighting forces, and the women who ran his empire. We begin now as Joyce Salisbury introduces us to a young boy named Temujin.
Life in the late 12th century steppes of Central Asia was harsh. There was endless warfare between the various clans and peoples of the steppes, and some of the tribes, the Tatars, the Turks, the Karaids, and others, despised the Mongols who lived to the north. A queen of the Christian tribe to the west summed up the attitude of the civilized steppe groups, writing, "The Mongols have always stunk and worn filthy clothes. They live far away. Let them stay there." Within this marginalized group, there were always people and families who fell by the wayside and died forgotten. That should have been the case of an unfortunate widow. The Tatars killed her husband and seized the dead man's animals and cast the widow and her children, including an 8-year-old boy named Temujin, into the wilderness. Everyone expected them to die in the harsh winter on the steppe, but they didn't. Through a series of bold moves, the young boy, Temujin, grew strong and fierce and wise. He grew up to become Genghis Khan, the conqueror of the largest empire that had yet been seen. And this Mongol empire shaped the history of the continent through the 13th century.
Once he came to a significant level of power, Temujin enhanced it and secured even greater loyalty from the Mongols by deliberately ignoring the traditional caste structure of his society. That is, instead of choosing leaders to serve under him who came from the highest-ranking families most closely related to him, which had been the way of Mongol life since it had come into existence, Temujin mostly ignored the elites of his society and focused on lower-ranking and low-caste individuals who showed intelligence and ability. He granted these individuals significant rewards in the form of food, animals, and rights to grazing lands. In return, these followers were not only increasingly loyal to him, but they were more than willing to perform the duties of tax collecting, keeping the men whom they were assigned to lead in fighting for him, and of course, they were ready to come and fight for Temujin whenever he called them to do so.
The young man, Temujin, took revenge on the Tatars who had killed his father and moved on from there. By the time he was 18, around 1180, he had gained a following of young Mongols who joined him in raids and battles against the other tribes. His reputation grew as his successes mounted.
Temujin found himself the undisputed ruler of a huge stretch of land between the Arctic tundra and the Gobi Desert. But he was not the ruler of this by name. In 1206, he called a kurutai near the Onan River and the sacred mountain of Burkan Khaldun in the hope of making his status official. The event lasted for days and drew Tartars, Mongols, and numerous other nomadic peoples. The lines of gers reportedly stretched for miles, and thousands of animals were brought to the nearby grazing lands to provide food for the event. At this time, he decided to unite his people, all his various people, under a new name, Yeke Mongol Ulus, or the Great Mongol Nation. He did away with all inherited positions, declaring that these were now the property of this new nation, to be given out or taken away as the leaders saw fit. And he also renamed himself Genghis Khan. Qing in Mongolian means something like strong or unshakable or universal. So Genghis Khan means strong ruler or unshakable leader or universal ruler. Eventually, that name became Genghis Khan with the more familiar spelling. And in the West, it was eventually pronounced Genghis.
Now he was poised to organize the many tribes and lead an army that could challenge all the neighbors of the Mongols of the steppes. The great Khan first reorganized the army into units based on their abilities and loyalty to him, not on clan and tribal affiliation. By his death in 1227, the sources tell us that Genghis Khan commanded more than 1 million soldiers, organized into 129 tumens, or units, of 10,000 men. The heart of this army remained the cavalry. Every warrior had 5 to 10 extra horses, so the army could cover astonishing distances in a day. Sources claim anywhere between 40 and 75 miles in a day, though 75 miles is hard to credit.
A Mongol warrior's kit was rudimentary. It consisted of plain trousers, a heavy double-breasted coat called a deal, fastened with a leather belt around the waist, a pair of leather or felt boots, and a fur or felt hat. His weapons included a sword and a dagger for close-in fighting, a spear and maybe a short halberd, and of course, a bow. A small percentage of Mongol horsemen wore heavy armor and rode armored steeds. And the heavy cavalry grew as Mongols got better access to iron and as they faced more heavily armored opponents. But the core of the Mongol army, the life on the steppe, meant that light cavalry was their great strength. These young men of the steppe were far from the best equipped army of their time, but they had 2 big advantages: their horses and their bows. Mongol ponies were small and wiry and exceptionally well trained. A stiff wooden saddle and sturdy stirrups made the mount responsive and meant that even in combat, the rider had his hands free to use his bow. A Mongol warrior could fire 6 arrows in quick succession, 2 as he charged an enemy line, 2 as he wheeled parallel to it, and 2 more as he galloped away. On campaign, a rider would have a string of 3 to 5 ponies. He could shift mounts on the ride and could cover 100 miles a day. Mongol cavalry needed little logistical support, and there was no baggage train. All the horses needed were grass and water, and soldiers could readily carry their own weapons and food. Mongol bows are composite recurve bows. Recurve referring to the fact that the ends of the bow curve away from the archer when it's strung. And composite because they're constructed of layers, a composite of wood, horn, and sinew. The result was a powerful weapon with a pull, that's the strength needed to draw it, of 100 to 170 pounds. The Mongol bow had a killing range of 200 to 300 yards.
The Mongols were also a fearsome army because with every enemy they conquered, they learned from that enemy's battle tactics and put them to good use. Larger weapons like siege engines would be constructed on the spot by Genghis Khan's group of engineers, recruited from foreign conquests specifically for their knowledge of how to build such things.
Since everything they owned had to fit in the cart, the Mongols did not own much. Their clothes were heavy felt, and their greatest prized possession was a huge iron pot in which they could boil large amounts of meat. The main adornments for women were headdresses of feathers and felt. Women enhanced their status by wearing headdresses a couple of feet high so they would stand out, and, as a contemporary wrote, give themselves a great luster when they are on horseback. The images of Sorkatani and her women show these dramatic headdresses, and the famous image of Sorkatani's daughter-in-law, wife of her son Kublai Khan, shows the tall headdress. While the men roamed in the plains, caring for flocks or making war, each woman was in full charge of the cart, the gare, and all its contents. They were the ones who traded for rare goods from traders in the south. Mongol men didn't want to handle money or conduct commerce. They left it to the women. A Persian chronicler observed, "The management of the man's fortune belongs to the women. They buy and sell as they think fit." The word ger meant home, but also homeland. So as women guarded the felt home she had made with her own hand, the Khan's women guarded the homeland. Men could have several wives, but each wife had her own cart and her own household. Genghis had 4 main wives, and each wife brought an alliance with a neighboring territory. As Genghis began to organize his conquests, he entrusted the administration of the regions to his daughters and sons, and the sons trusted their wives to administer their holdings as they had always trusted them with the contents of the ger. The chroniclers recorded speeches Genghis made at the marriages of his daughters, and these words reveal that he imagined an equality between husband and wife. He used the metaphor of the important Mongol cart, saying that through marriage, the couple would become 2 shafts of one cart, which can't move without both partners working together equally. The harsh life on the steppe demanded the skills of both women and men, and Genghis imagined the same scenario for his conquests. When Genghis delegated lands to be managed by the married couples, he gave Tolui, his youngest son, Eastern Mongolia. Lucky for Tolui, his wife, Sorkotani, was a more than competent partner to pull the cart of the state. Tolui spent much of his time drinking and riding, and he left the work of governing to his wife, Sorkotani. But what did they have to administer beyond the contents of the gers? The Mongolian steppe didn't offer much in the way of resources, but it lay just off the most important trading lanes in the world, the Silk Road, which was just south of the 500 miles of the Gobi Desert. The Silk Road included a network of trade that connected China, India, the Mediterranean, and the Muslim countries of Central Asia in between. Genghis made some stunning victories along the Silk Road, but his real success in controlling the whole region was to require the rulers of those regions to marry his daughters. But this wasn't a traditional marriage where women were simply added to a harem of women. No, Genghis required the ruler to divorce all previous wives and to make the Mongol wife his co-ruler. As Genghis told one of his daughters, who married a ruler along the Silk Road, "When I am going on an expedition, you should be my helper. When I am galloping, you should be my steed." And it worked. These loyal and talented daughters secured the lands along the Silk Road, and that was essential for Genghis to ensure the loyalty of his subjects, who began to long for goods to buy. Once Genghis had united the tribes, bringing peace, milk, and meat, he kept them loyal by bringing new riches into the nation, and these riches came along the Silk Road. Here they could get camel wool, blankets, and soft silk that slid on the skin to replace rough, scratchy felt. Now they had iron for knives and flint for fire. Even gems and gold and silver ornaments brightened up the gers, and soft carpets could cover the floors. Now there was a reason to expand the conquests, and Genghis did, securing the Silk Road and creating a single trade bloc.
As the Mongol tribe grew in size and success, so did its appetite for products of the more sedentary civilizations. Consequently, Chinggis's gaze fell on China. At this point, 2 non-Chinese dynasties ruled what is now North China. They were the Tangut Shisha in China's northwest and the Jurchen Jin dynasty in the northeast. Chinggis invaded the Shisha in 1209 and made its Tangut emperor his vassal. This put the Mongols in control of the eastern reaches of the Silk Road with its rich caravans. That same year, in the northeast of China, the new Jurchen Jin emperor made a fateful blunder. Jurchen rulers saw themselves as emperors of the sown and also as khans of the steppe. The Jin emperor expected the obeisance of the upstart Mongol Khan. But Genghis was second to no man. He bristled at a condescending message delivered by the Jin ambassador. He spat on the envoy before riding off in a cloud of dust. Genghis Khan planned another invasion. The Mongols stormed into the Jurchen homeland in Manchuria, routed the Jin army at the Battle of Badger Mouth, and laid siege to the Jin capital, Zhongtu, today's Beijing. Zhongtu was one of the biggest cities in the world and the seat of a powerful empire. Its riches were like nothing the Mongols could have imagined.
Scholars have seen a clear shift in Genghis Khan's fighting strategy after the Battle of Beijing. No longer did he simply want the stuff of the other people. Rather, he began to operate as someone who was interested not only in conquering, but maintaining long-term rule over those he had conquered. Instead of simply moving from grassland to grassland and letting nature restore what had been depleted by a grazing herd, he now set out to carefully maintain grazing lands. He also set up granaries and other storehouses for agriculturally produced foodstuffs, and then established a system of roads so those items could be transported more easily throughout Mongol territory.
Like other nomad tribes, the Mongols were illiterate. They held their history and traditions in their memories, rather than taking up valuable room in their carts for written texts. But once Genghis began to expand his empire, he recognized the importance of written laws and traditions. He turned to other literate peoples, Muslims, Persians, Christians, and Chinese, to record his edicts. He specifically recruited a Tatar from the Uyghur tribe of Muslims who lived in Central Asia to record his edicts. He dictated his laws, and they were written in Uyghur script on white paper, invented in China, and kept in blue binders. Let no one alter the blue writing, he warned. These laws became known as the Ikyasa, the Great Law of Genghis Khan, and it was strikingly new in several respects, especially for women. And I should say it was broken by his sons as soon as the great Khan died. The law forbade torture and intimidation, for as he said, the accused must not confess out of fear and anguish. According to the Muslim chronicler Rashid al-Din, the Mongols tried to extend these legal protections into China and into Muslim lands where torture was routinely used. For women, Genghis decreed that women could not be traded for animals or property, nor should they be raped or treated as spoils of war. As I said, these laws helping women fell by the wayside immediately once Genghis died, but they reflect his thinking about women, and his treatment of his wives and daughters reflected his ideas.
When Genghis Khan died in 1227, his greatest legacy was perhaps the way he had managed to unify so many disparate groups of people. Uyghurs, Huns, Turks, Arabs, Chinese, Indians, and more. All of these people had been incorporated into his empire. And one ethnic or cultural group was not given preference over another, nor were some groups considered of lower status than another. His other legacy, as you probably have guessed by now, was a tradition of warfare and violence. This was inextricably bound up with the initial Mongol tradition of acquiring things by looting, but had evolved by the end of Genghis Khan's life to a desire to conquer and rule. Given that Temujin had clearly been a one-of-a-kind leader, the kind that only appears in history one or maybe two times in a millennium, you can guess that after his death, things might change. It was his singular genius, charisma, talent, and above all, his flexibility, his willingness to adapt old customs, to add new ones, and to keep learning that had made the Mongol nation what it was. But it was precisely his brilliant idea to reward loyalty, service, and ability rather than kinship that would ultimately prove to bring the Mongol nation to an end. By not clarifying what role his sons should play in the maintenance of his empire, or how his most trusted advisors, who were not relatives, should proceed, he created discord and unrest that would eventually lead to the empire's end. But that end was still a little way off. Indeed, it was after his death that the Mongol nation reached its greatest size and power, which suggests that he had created enough momentum to advance the expansion of his empire.
Thanks for watching. If you'd like to learn more about the topics in this episode, the full list of series that these clips came from is in the description below. You can watch them all now on Wondrium.